So welcome to the April edition of An Evening With, me and Andy Sparks, Julian Best and John Neeshaw, and we're going to talk about various methods of layout control. What we're going to cover very briefly DC. The vast majority of what we're going to talk about will be DCC, traditional DCC. There'll be mentions of Bluetooth DCC, which is the new technology or newish technology that is coming to a railway near you soon. And there will also be all mentions about radio control. I've got a video which I shot down at Graham Powell's house down in Somerset when Ian and I went to film his indoor railway for the last evening with, and it shows you quite effectively the benefits of running with radio control. And then I've also got various links and everything which will be on the end of the video for people. If they're interested, they can go and see and get more experience of these particular units. So I'll just highlight myself. Spotlight for everyone. Hello, this is me. Excuse all the background, that's all my wife's stuff, except for the 3D printers. So a little bit about myself. If you don't know me, I'm Peter Reynolds. I've been a member of the Guild twice, actually. I left a number of years ago and rejoined again back in 2017, if I remember correctly. So my experience is, when my working life experience, I'm Network Rail now, but back in the day when I first started, I started working for a company called Reynolds BCC, which is basically the British Communications Corporation, not BBC, but BCC, and we made military communication systems. And I started on leaving school making the Klansman, which some of you, if you've been in the army, you may have experienced. We also made another system called the Jaguar. Now, the Jaguar radio system is interesting because the technology from that system led to mobile phones. So one of my Reynolds was like a huge conglomerate made up of various different divisions, and one of the divisions of the company that I worked for was Reynolds Vodafone, which is now Vodafone. So that's where the analog mobile phone technology came from. It came from the VHF and UHF radio systems that we made, and they were made for export, not for the British military. After that, I worked in computing for 23 years. I used to do chip repairs, repairs down to component level on computers. And when the company that I worked for was bought out by Hewlett Packard, they bought us basically to kill us off. So I ended up being made redundant. Now I work for Network Rail, although you may know that I was a signalman for Network Rail, or a signaller, but I am no longer a signaller, and I am temporarily training, and hopefully I'm going to be more formally involved in that. So I will be training signallers and MOMs and other people to do the jobs that they do. So that's me. I'm going to talk about DC first, very briefly. DC is the traditional system for making your trains move, you know, from electric. Obviously there's clockwork and live steam. but that is the traditional way of making your things move. And it is quite important, because more often than not, if you make a kit-built locomotive, for example, and if that doesn't work on DC, you're not going to have all that much luck getting it to work on DCC. So it's good to be able to have access to DC technology. And like I mentioned a little bit in the preamble, I have upstairs, I have a power supply. It's a bench power supply. And what that does is it allows me to run current controlled, although it hasn't got an auto reverse, but I can run stuff in a controlled manner, and I can test my locomotives doing that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend going out and buying one of these unless you do lots of things on the side. I mean, I do lots of electronic projects on the side, and this power supply also powers all the things that I make. So if I make a lamp for Jeff for the SR7mm group, I can set it to 5 volts or 3 volts or whatever, and I can test it. Conversely, if I have a locomotive, I can use it to test the locomotive. And the thing about them is you can get them, but they are a little bit cheaper than some commercial DC units. You can buy a reasonable unit for about £50, but it is quite a bit of an expense just to use it on your bench. I mean, I only use it because I've got other things to do with it. It's just handy to have it because I can use it to test the locomotive. Most of you may have seen the SR7mm group layout. That's all DC. We started building it 32 years ago when DCC wasn't very, how can I put it, wasn't very mature as technology, or it was getting there as a technology. So the railway is DC, and it's got to the stage now where it is totally impractical, expense-wise more than anything, to convert it to DCC. What is the advantage of the bench supply compared to, say, a gauge master DC controller? The thing about it is, the big advantage of it is that I can limit the current that it gives. I can set, it has a thing to adjust the voltage, but it also has an automatic current limiter. So if I turn that all the way down, or if I turn it up to a sort of just off the where it turns itself off, I can make sure that it doesn't draw too much current. So if I think that the locomotive might not quite run properly, I can turn the current limiting down, and it will basically, if it does draw a lot of current, it immediately switches off. I don't have to wait for a thermal trip or anything, which is basically what is in a gauge master or in most controllers. Some of the top of the range ones you can get electronic cut-offs, but this one has got an electronic cut-off which is absolutely streets ahead in terms of cutting off. So if there's a problem, it literally goes straight away, rather than waiting for a thermal event to happen. Sorry, I'm just having to move. My camera seems to be refocusing every so often, so I'm just moving back a little bit. I might be close to it. So the controllers that we made for the SR7mm group are these. Now, these are just about as simple as you can get in terms of electronic method. Now, I designed...
No, I'm not really watching the telly.
Sorry? sorry, I designed these using a software package called PCB Magic, I think it is. Hold on, just bear with me a second. Yeah, I think it's Easy PCB or something like that. But there are various packages that you can get which are available. The design for the circuit came from Canada, came from the London, Ontario Model Railway Club and a guy called Rob Paisley. Now, if you go to, I'll put the links out for this later, but if you go to the internet and type in model railroad throttles, one of the sites that it will bring up is his site. It's Circuitus. It's a Canada link, so it's a .ca, and that's where the design came from. And so far, I've made 17 of these, and they cost about £8 to make, less the transformer. So less the transformer, you need to run O gauge, you need a 4-amp transformer to run this at 15 volts we use, but you can use 12 to 15 volts. And the rotary control connects to these 3 pads here, and the output is the 2 pads next to the resistor there. And obviously reversing switch and 1 forward bias diode to do the suppression. But you need a transformer, and a bridge rectifier for this, to run this. But it costs about £8 less the transformer to make. And very successful. Need a little bit of adjusting, need setting up a bit, but they're very good. I mean, you've seen the videos of the trains running. All the trains in the new shed use these controllers. So that's the homemade DC. You may have seen that there are DC controllers advertised in the Gazette, the Vanguard. They're, by all accounts, pretty good. Richard Clark bought one and he says that it's very good. And you may have also noticed that the Helmsman controllers that used to be available individually have been bought by Pico, and they're currently being re-engineered, and they should be on sale hopefully sometime this year. So most everyone goes to DCC, but DC still has its place. It's great for simplicity. If you want to make your own controllers, there are so many designs out there. You would call it, in today's speak, it's such a mature technology. Everyone's had a go at it. There are so many designs if you want to have a go, but there are still people, Helmsman, Vanguard and Gagemaster, of course, who still make DC controllers, and it has its place. If you're interested in these ones, yes, sorry, Dave, is your controller pulse width modulated or straight voltage? It is sort of PWM. It's sort of PWM because it's a thyristor, this component. You don't need a huge heat sink on it, and this will do up to 4 amps. The ones that Rob Paisley made in Canada, they do 10 amps. So these will easily do 10 amps if you want. But it's sort of pulse width modulated, but it's not a square wave or a pulse. It's sort of like a curve. And if you go to the website page that has this design on it, it will show you the waveform. You can flatten the waveform by increasing the value of this capacitor, which is 1,000 microfarads. Some of our controllers have got 3,300 microfarad capacitors fitted, and it is flatter, but it's still a bit like a sawtooth waveform. It's not straight DC. For straight DC, you need a transistor controller, and the trouble with transistor controller, they produce a lot of heat. We've got some older style DC controllers again at Jeff's, and they've got a whacking great big 15 amp transistor mounted on a huge heat sink, and they still get hot at 2 amps. Use a FET. Yeah, you could use a FET. You could use, some of his designs have got field effect transistors in, and I do use them for other things. But yeah, but this one, this little thing here, which you can see, it's not a transistor. It's a strange device called a programmable unijunction transistor, and it basically forms an oscillator. You feed it with DC, but not smooth DC, and the reason for that is that it gives you a little bit of a pulsed output, so you get a good effect with pulse width. You get the effect of pulse width modulation, but not pulse width modulation. Very good, very simple, very easy to make, and very reliable, virtually bomb-proof. Now, having talked about DC a bit, I'm going to ask Andy, do you want to go first and talk about your DCC system? Andy, you can unmute yourself.
Right, that's better. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Right, so Andy, I will unspotlight myself, and I'll spotlight you instead. So this is Mr. Andy Sparks. You may have seen him on the forum if you are familiar with the forum. If you use it, you'll see Andy on the forum. And what Andy is going to talk about, we're going to start off talking about DCC control systems, and Andy is going to talk about the power cab, the NCE power cab. Now, if you just bear with me a second, I have got to get something up, because like I did everything except print off the questions I was going to ask you. Just bear with me. So, Andy, when you came to decide about what DCC system with one, what kind of functionality were you looking for before you selected the NCE power cab?
So this was about 10 or 11 years ago. At the time, I had a fairly large 00 loft layout. So I'll come on to O gauge later, but this was 00. And I'd already got it wired for DC. I'd sort of re-entered the hobby. I'd done a lot of the hobby as a teenager, re-entered the hobby sort of a couple of years before, built a fairly large loft layout without really knowing what I was doing. But I had all the points controlled with solenoids off DC. So it wasn't really for accessory control. It was trains, and I was particularly attracted by sound. And so, yes, train control, making some of the wiring easier for less isolating sections as I expanded the layout, and sound were the sort of key things. Power, I thought, wasn't a big issue because it was 00. I think the other thing I was really looking for was ease of use and the ergonomics. And I think the power cab controller, which I expect most of you have seen, I think it's one of the best looking and easiest to use controllers. It's got a lot of buttons, but they're well set out. It's got the nice slidey thing for power, or you can increment in speed steps of 10 or 1 there. You've got your direction at the top. And the other thing about it that I think is really good is that programming is a piece of cake with it. You can program on the main, you can program on a test strap, but it works all off the controller without too many switches. And I haven't found another controller since that is as easy to use for that. So I think, that's really what I was looking for, something to control trains and sound.
Okay, so you've also answered the second question, which was,
Well, I've done some of it, yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, I
No,
sort of
that's all right.
strayed a bit.
That's fine. No, that's fine. I'd rather we talk like a conversation rather than it be too sort of stunted and everything. Did you have to make any compromise or compromises when with the way that it worked? Did you discover anything after the fact, for example, that you may not have known about beforehand?
Yeah, one or two things. I think when I was choosing it, um, this is coming back a bit to the why I chose Power Cab, but I looked at lots of reviews and they're all very reluctant to say System X is the best. They all sort of beat around the bush a bit, but nobody had a bad word to say about Power Cab, or very very few bad words. And the value for money was outstanding compared with what I could see of the other systems on the market. I think you may talk about Merg later, and Merg will be a different order of magnitude again in terms of value for money, but of the commercial systems, I think PowerCab is sort of basically not much more than half the price of its nearest rival. But all the reviews said to try the system first, so I actually took myself off to Digitrains in Lincoln and played around with lots of systems. I'd already got it in the back of my mind that PowerCab was the one to go for, and that just confirmed it because I didn't find any problems, and ergonomically it felt the easiest one to use. I think one thing that perhaps was a compromise, that came up in some of the reviews, was that you can't run DC locos on the system. And that I thought, whereas some of the systems allow you to run one DC loco on
Yeah.
address naught.
Yeah.
And I thought that might be quite an issue because at the time I had a DC fleet and I've got to fit them all with chips, and it might be useful to be able to have a transitionary period where I could still run some of the old locos. But in practice, from what people say, running DC locos on DCC systems isn't a good idea. They don't run well. It can fry them or can do some damage to the loco. And it was pretty easy to put the chips into my loco, so I did it very quickly. Other people say that the system isn't compatible with a lot of the other main systems on the market, but as a sort of solo modeler at the time, I wasn't in the club at that stage. That wasn't really an issue for me. I wasn't going to take it around, or wasn't going to sort of need to take it around to friends' houses and things. So that might be more of a consideration now, but it wasn't a consideration then. I suppose the other big compromise is the power, and the power is distinctly lower than a lot of its competitors in the marketplace. So things like the Gauge Master Prodigy and the lens systems, I think, have got sort of between 2.5 and 5 amps, and the power cab is 1.8 amps. So it was fine for a modest sized DC layout. What I found as I expanded the layout and I put lots of the Gauge Master Auto Frogs on my points for controlling frog polarity, and they started to play up and they weren't reliably switching. And I spoke to the Gauge Master technical support, and they said, "What power have you got, and how many locos on the layout, and this sort of thing." And I probably had about 30 locos sitting on the layout. I hadn't used many of them at the same time, but they were all drawing a little bit of power, and that was basically stopping some of the things like the autofrolls working properly. At that point, I bought a booster, and that sorted the problem out, straight away. It was really quite a remarkable change, and I hadn't realised I was short of power, but I clearly was. And obviously, when you come onto O gauge, while I think the basic power cab would sort you out on a small layout with one or two dipole locos, if you start to want to run Hellion diesels or something, then you're very quickly going to need a booster.
How about the way that you went about selecting this unit? How much of an influence was it actually going to be able to try the unit out before you bought it? How much of an influence was it to be able to go to Digitrains and actually try it before you bought it?
Well, it didn't change my decision, but obviously, if I
confirmed your decision, then in other words,
it made me feel easier about the decision, and it reassured me that I was making the right decision. And I suppose if it was quite possible that if I made a different decision from reading the reviews, that I'd have gone to Digitrains and changed my mind. But
you were happy about your decision.
It just gave me a bit of reassurance that I was forking out the money, I was going for the right system. So I think it's worth doing, but there's enough information out there to make a decision without going if you have to, I think. But it's
okay. Do you want to show the extra things? You can screen share.
Yeah, I mean, I found quite a lot of upgrades that are quite reasonably priced. So if I just hopefully that.
No.
These are a few upgrades that I've made to the system that I would recommend. I mean, the first one is dead simple.
It's not
not working?
No, it's not shared. Hold on. Maybe if I do that. Now try sharing it.
Hold on.
Right, hold on.
Right. I'll try. I've now lost the PowerPoint because I think I closed it. Just a minute. Can you see it now?
No.
No. All right. Well, forget about that. I'll just talk you through.
Just say what you bought.
Yeah.
That's it.
Can you see me now?
Well, I can see Zoom. I can't see what you.
No.
No.
You can see me. You can see me again, can you?
Yeah, I can see you again. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll talk you through it. So, I mean, the first thing, I've got this little box that I've made up, which you might was a doubly good idea because I had to drink a bottle of port first before building the box. But basically, the first thing I added to it was this curly cable, which is an awful lot nicer than the flat cable that NCE provide with the system. It just makes it easier to use. Inside the box, you can see there we have this thing here is a Tam Valley booster, which was about £40, and that takes the system from 1.8 amps up to 3 amp continuous, 5 amp instantaneous, which I find is enough for a couple of Hellion diesels to potter around quite happily, and certainly enough for my 00 loft layout with 30 odd locos simmering away. I've also put onto here the BCC Concepts ammeter and voltmeter, which is a really useful bit of kit when you're testing locos and sort of installing chips, because you can work out what current they're drawing and therefore decide what sort of size of decoder you need to put into it. Um, and the other thing I found a really good upgrade was to get a higher voltage power supply. The one that's supplied with the power cab is about 14 volts, I think, and by the time it's gone through the system, it comes out at about 12 at track, but maybe 12 or 13. DCC Concepts sell an 18.2 volt one, which is, I mean, they give a lot of hype about it being a medical grade power supply and all this sort of stuff. But the important thing to me seems to be that it has more power. And I noticed the locos with the initial system, I noticed the locos were running significantly slower than they did on DC. Whereas with the upgraded power supply, they now run at about 25% faster at top speed, and some of them were a bit slow, and they're now quite respectable. So I think that was a worthwhile upgrade.
Okay, all right, Andy. So everyone, that's Andy's experience with the NC Power Cab, and going on what I've heard around, it is quite a popular system, and it is, like Andy said, a decent price point. It's not ruinously expensive. It is at the lower end of the price range when it comes to DCC systems, but it's eminently usable. The only downside that I can see personally from it is its compatibility. It is a little bit limited in what it's compatible with. So now what we'll do is we'll pass over to John Neeshaw. John, will you talk about the lengths? Can you unmute, John? That's it.
Always a good plan when speaking. Thanks.
Okay, so John's going to talk about the lens system that he's got, which is basically the European. I'd be fair to describe it as the European standard, wouldn't I?
I think you'd be even fairer to describe it as the world standard.
Yeah.
But I mean, and there is a reason for that. Although I've settled on lengths as a base system, it's more, rather than a single choice, it's more a bit of a journey, because I have a reputation as a bit of an early adopter of things. And so when DCC first started significantly appearing around the turn of the century, I was quite keen to go and have a fiddle with it and get into it. And the choices at that time were really quite limited. There was Lentz using the protocols which Bernd Lentz had produced together with Marklin and then recommended to the NMRA that they might be the standard for DCC. And running up close behind them were Digitrax, the American system, which is also very, very reliable. So what I did was I bought a thing which is now an antique called a Lentz Compact, which probably nobody's ever seen, which was a single thing which allowed you to operate about 10 addresses. But it demonstrated that, to my satisfaction, that DCC seemed to work and looked like a good idea. And I sold it quite rapidly in about 2001, and then bought a bigger Lentz system. And I still have Lentz system and Lentz systems as the base for all of the railways I use. I'm sure you've seen them. Lentz system comes in a box which sort of looks like that, and on the back has an assortment of plugs which you can plug things into, an AC in and track power out, and it has something on the back there which I happen to have that hand controller plugged into, and it's also got a thing over here labeled LMAB, and both of those are what's called ExpressNet, which is the way Lentz and similar systems communicate across many devices. The first proper Lentz controller I had was this one, which is called an LH90. It's quite loved of old-fashioned railway modelers because it's got a knob, and old men generally like knobs. and so does my wife, strangely, because she likes the one with the knob on it. But I prefer, when I was using it, the one with buttons on. This is the LH100, which there's still many of around, and they're working reliably and wonderfully well to operate the trains. And we operated trains like that for quite a long while on club layouts, on home layouts. The one, if I'm allowed to wander on a little bit, the thing which bugged me was this. I was tied by a piece of wire to a box, and that was sort of annoying. I put lots of faceplates around the room so I could plug my thing in various different places, but I was still sort of pinned down to one place. I rather liked the lens system. It did what I wanted. It played sounds. It did all the stuff if I got the right decoders in. It was compatible with a lot of other equipment, whether it was Roku or Uhlenbrock, which I was using for other stuff, and CT electronic stuff for point control. Lots of compatibility, but still sort of tied to one place. I'll stop talking for a minute because you want to ask me a question, don't you?
Do I want to ask you a question? No,
Yeah.
I thought you were going very well. Carry on. Please.
Well, the question is going to be, am I happy with that decision?
Well,
was it the right one? And I think at the time in 2000 whatever, there were really only a couple of choices that early. It was either going to be lens or it was going to be Digitrax, and that lent you down one or two paths. One which was ExpressNet, was the system by which everything communicated, and the other one was Railcom, I think,
Railcom,
which is the way everything connected. There was an aberration which some people liked and still do like, a thing called ZTC, which was available in the UK at the time, and I'm told is still available. I don't know whether it's still being updated, but a rather sort of cottage industry sort of controlling system, which some people are very, very fond of and is still around. But I made this decision to go with one of the standards, one of the big standards, which was lens at the time. And as the base for which my trains are controlled, it has been incredibly reliable and still is incredibly reliable. And one of the boxes I've got several of them now, is one that I acquired in 2005, and I've updated the ICs in them, so they're relatively up-to-date systems. One of the things I've been most impressed with is that the lens system does tend to be bulletproof. You can say it doesn't develop very quickly, it doesn't have so many new bells and whistles, but it's almost impossible to break it. We chuck them in the back of vans, they go around the place, and they still come out working each time. And I quite like that. I like that reliability. If I may move on a little bit, Peter, my bug about the lens or the Digitrax at the time was you were tied to it, which made me start looking a little bit further about computer control. Not automation, that's something entirely different, but being able to use something else to give you control of your trains.
Yeah, I know you're going to talk about JMRI, and well, which one's that? That is engine driver. That's my mobile phone. Yeah,
and that has an app running on it called WeThrottle.
Yeah,
which allows me to drive my trains without any string, and it allows me to give anybody who's got a mobile phone access to our trains. But if you want to come to JMRI later on, Peter, we're happy to.
Yeah. No, I use I've got multiple systems, and I use a throttle on an Android tablet. WeThrottle is the Apple one, isn't it? It's one for,
that's right.
Yeah, it's the one for iPhones. Alex, it's called WeThrottle, WI and then throttle, but that one only works on Apple phones, so an iPhone. There are other ones that work on Android, and I use an Android one with mine. Okay, John. So you've got the thing that you would change immediately, or the thing that you sought to change, was the fact that you were tied to the kit. You couldn't sort of move around at your leisure. It was tethered.
There were two issues. One was the tetheredness of it, which was the fairly early issue, maybe 15 years ago. But later, as we all started using sound decoders more and more, and the sound decoders got more complicated, it was knowing what sound was going to come out when you pressed a button.
Yeah.
Because on a lot of systems, what you get presented with is F1, F2, F9, up to F28, if you're lucky enough to be running a system which will go that far up. But you have to remember
what does what
F11 does. Now, if you had a system which would print onto your mobile device what those things actually did, that would be a big step forward too. And that's something else which JMRI has done for us, is that when you use WeThrottle, if you've programmed your locos correctly into your whatever system you're using as a computer, then your throttle, your handset will tell you, you probably can't read it. No, you can't read them. But it says on them, multi-drive heavy, injector is written on the button. So I know what it is, what noise it's going to make when I press it.
Yeah, the engine driver app that I use does the same.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, if your JMRI is configured, it's a two-way thing. It will talk to it and it will display. So if you want to turn the lights on or do the guards whistle or everything, it will tell you on the tablet. So we'll leave JMRI at the moment, and then what I'm going to do. Yeah, well, Julian has said, because people like knobs and buttons, which you don't get on a phone, it is true that people do like to be able to rotate things and press things and do stuff like that. But when we talk about JMRI, I've got a couple of systems here which create their own Wi-Fi network, and you can buy throttles that do that, that provide you with that. You don't have to use a tablet, although a tactile throttle is going to set you back anywhere from 100 to 200 quid nowadays, just the throttle. Okay, so I'll unspotlight John for the moment. And Julian, if you want to talk about the opposite end of the spectrum, this Arduino based system.
Yeah, sure. I was also going to talk a little bit about train controller as well. So I'm just wondering whether if I talk briefly about train controller, then it might lead on to what I've done with some Arduinos more naturally. If that's all right with you, Peter.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Yeah.
Okay, so about probably 12, 13, 14 years ago, I was looking around for the most optimum way of controlling my layout. Previously, I'd used the stud control, point control with stud contacts and a pencil type thing, or push buttons with a diode routing matrix, and I wanted something a little bit more sophisticated to control it. So I looked around at the time as to what was available, and there were various software packages out there. Train controller was one of them. There were other things like JMRI, and there was other software like Rockrail, which was in its infancy. And I tried several of them to have a look and make up my own mind as to what I wanted, because all I wanted was a method of controlling points and signals. I didn't want anything. I wasn't interested in automation. I didn't want anything to take over my control of the layout. I just wanted to make it a little bit easier. And at the time, I decided that the train controller was probably the best of the bunch at the time. It was still expensive then. It's even more expensive now. It comes in 3 different flavors. It comes in bronze, silver, and gold. Gold gives you the most control. Bronze will probably give you enough control for most people. But if you're looking at buying gold now, it will set you back nearly £1,000. I think it is ridiculously expensive for what it is. I probably wouldn't buy it today because of that, because it is too expensive for what it is. But I've just upgraded over the years, and so the cost hasn't been so noticeable. But it does give you an awful lot of flexibility as to how you can control your layout. So I use Lens like John as well. Actually, since John was talking about his lens, I'll show you the newer lens throttle. So that's the LH101, which has got a big knob on it. So if you like your knobs, you can use the LH101, and they also do a radio control version as well. So no wires attached. So you can use it hands-free should you wish, and you don't want to use your phone. So there's a couple more options for Lens. So my lens controller connects either via USB or via Ethernet to your computer, and with your computer running this software, you can then configure the software to suit your layout and what you want to do with it. So I thought probably the easiest thing to do was to actually share my screen and show you Train Controller running. Now this is running on my PC up in the study where I am at the moment, but it's actually connected to the railway, which is in the garage, and it's connected over Ethernet. And you can see at the top you've got a representation, a schematic of the layout. The red squares are blocks, and the numbers within those blocks are trains, and so they're occupied. I wouldn't worry about anything below the schematic. That's just me creating different functionality for the layout. You can see the signals, you can see the points, and what you can do is I've set this up to look like an NX panel. You can obviously set it up however you like, but I've tried to resemble a 70s NX panel, for that's the era I tend to run my layout in. So you can, this is very good also for touch screens. You can then touch the screen and operate the points, the signals, whatever you want to do. So you can run it completely manually. If I wanted to change a point, I could just click on the point and the point will move. And you'll see that little green dot which moved across. That is feedback from the point to tell me that it's moved across. And that's me operating the layout in the garage in real time. Similarly with the signal, I could click on the signal and the signal will change, and you have to take my word for it, but the signal will have moved in the garage. So in its basic format, that's just me operating the layout like you might do conventionally with buttons and switches. I put these back to normal. However, you can do a lot more than that. Because I've configured it like an NX panel, I can set a route. So I can click on one part of the route, and I'm going to run it through to the next part, which is here. And what it will do now is it will set up the route. Once the point has moved across and has proved, then it will clear the signal, which is done here. I can set it for the next part of the route as well. So I could say, right, I want to go from here, which is the end of the scenic section, into Spey and Bridge, the storage sidings. And I'll click on there, and it will prove the points in the correct place, and it will clear the advanced starter, it will clear the home for Spey and Bridge, and then it will clear the distant. So it's done that automatically. It knows that the line is clear, there's no trains in front, and I could then run my train through, which is sitting in the bay platform at the moment. Now I can run my train conventionally. I could use Lens to control it. I could use the wire throttle. I could use the Wi-Fi throttle, or I could use a throttle within Train Controller itself. Or I could even get Train Controller to run the train automatically for me if I wanted to. There's a thing called drag and drop. I could click on the drag and drop button here, and then what I could do is I can pick up the train and I can move it and drag it into another location, like here. But I'm not going to do that, because what I can do instead is I can show you. I don't know. Can you see? Anyone see that throttle that's on the screen? Okay. So this throttle is, I can choose the train that I'm going to control. And what I can do is I can set it off running. Now I can't see what's happening here. All I'm relying upon here is the movement of the train into the block. So if we look at the bay platform, and you can see that the train is now moving into the next block, and I'll stop it before it goes too far, like so, because I can't actually see what the train's doing, but I know it's moving on the railway because those blocks have moved. So if I send it back again, just to prove the point, move it the other direction, then you can see the train moving back again as well. Now you can also get Lens train controller to do this automatically, and the way it will do it automatically is you do a thing called speed profiling, and what happens with speed profiling is that you run the locomotive between 3 points on the layout, 3 blocks, and train controller will progressively speed up the train as it moves across those blocks. So it starts very slowly initially, and then it gets faster and faster. And what it does is, because it knows the distance of those blocks and it knows how fast it thinks it's controlling the train, it can then work out what they call a profile of that train. And it can very accurately, amazingly accurately, that then determine the distances involved if it wants to automatically run a train, say, into a platform and stop it before it gets to the buffer stops. And you've got a lot of control over it as well. If we go into the edit mode for train controller, if I click on the block here at the end of the line, and then move this out, you can see in the block editor here, you've got a lot of control here. So what I've done is I'm saying that the distance involved within this block, I've set points at which the train will start to slow down, and points at which it has to have stopped by. And you can control this as well with different sensors. So for example, the main sensor here within this block is a block occupancy detector. It detects current being drawn, but I've also got an optical sensor at the end here. So if I go back into this again here, you can see this is split into 2 parts. So this bit here is the current detection. This bit here is the optical detection. So I know that even if train controller gets it wrong, as soon as it hits that infrared detector at the end here, it's going to stop the train dead. So it's not going to go through the buffer stops or anything worse. That's just one example of the flexibility you've got within train controller. You design your own track, you design the way it looks, you design what it does and how much it does it. And now it relies upon 2 things when it's doing this. It relies upon the DCC bus, which is the method, the 2 wires by which it sends out controls to the locomotives, and it also sends out control to things like the signals and the points. And in order to control those points, you have to use accessory decoders, and these accessory decoders take that DCC signal and they operate your point, they operate your signal or whatever. Now you want to know that your point has moved. So in order to know that your point has moved, you then need a feedback method, and there's lots of different feedback methods available. It all depends upon what DCC control system you're using. Because I'm using Lens, they use a system called RS bus, which again is just 2 wires, but those 2 wires then take feedback information, and that might be block occupancy, it might be point movement, it might be whatever you want. You know, it could even be a push button. You press a push button and you get sent a signal down the feedback bus. The controller, the command station, takes that information, sends it on to train controller. Train controller says, oh, that button's been pressed, I need to do this. And whatever this is that down to you and how you set up train controller. Now one of the things about these accessory decoders and the feedback controllers is you typically buy them as separate units, and they're probably quite expensive as well. Merg do accessory decoders, but they don't do feedback controllers. So I discovered that people have written software libraries for the Arduino. Now, if you don't know what an Arduino is, it's a small microcontroller, and they come in various flavors. So I have a few here. That's probably one of the smallest. It's called a Nano. very small, as you can tell. And then you've got ones next size up, which is a Uno, a little bit bigger, a little bit more functionality. Then you've got a Mega. This gives you a lot more inputs and outputs to it. And I think they've just released what they call a Giga, which has got even more. There's a new version of the Nano called the Every. There's ones you can buy with Bluetooth on it. There's a huge range of different Arduinos out there. And because I discovered that people had written these open software libraries, because ExpressNet, the Lens DCC control bus, and the feedback bus, the RS feedback bus, they're all open protocols. Anyone can develop these software libraries. So once you have the software libraries and you have an Arduino, you can do it yourself. You can make your own method of controlling, should you wish, if you're a nerd like me, you've got your own method of controlling your layout. So I've been busy coming up with a range of different circuit boards to control different things. And the reason I do it myself is it means that I can design the board exactly as I want. So I can, for example, have feedback and the accessory decoder all on the same board. So I'm saving space, I'm making it much more convenient. And because I'm doing it myself, it's cheaper as well. For example, a typical feedback controller from Lens will give you 8 channels of feedback. LDT do one, which is 16 channels, but it's typically 70 quid, something like that you're talking about. This was one of my first boards. This is, no, not that one, this one. This is a 16 channel feedback board, opto-isolated inputs to it. You can set whatever address you want on it. And that probably worked out about 20 quid, something like that. So then I'd expanded a little bit more. That's a 16 channel accessory decoder. Again, you set the address by pressing a button and then sending a command to it from your DCC controller. That's a 32 channel accessory decoder. And these have also got opto-isolated inputs as well. So you've got feedback and you've got accessory decoder all on the same board. This one was for controlling, well, principally I designed it for controlling points. So you've got 8 points that you can control on there, all with feedback built onto it. This is a block occupancy detector. So you've got 8 channels of block occupancy, which form your feedback straight onto your feedback bus. And this is my latest one, which I'm working on, which is 16 channels of servo control, also with 16 channels of feedback on it as well. The benefit of this one is someone does another software library for what they call easing. Easing is the process of a semaphore signal, for example, speeding up and slowing down. And that's the way that gives you bounce on a signal. But this software library gives you many, many options for different bounces. So I've got 16 different bounce types that you can have built into this. Again, all configurable on the one board. So again, I've probably gone a little bit over the top, but it's very flexible, and it gives me control over it as well. So I'm not bound by different manufacturers as to what they want to do or how they want to do it or what they want to charge me. I can make things as flexible or as unflexible as I wish, and it's cheaper and a good bit of fun as well. It's good fun if you're into that kind of stuff. So
you rather unfairly describe yourself as a bit of a nerd, but a lot of these things
geek.
are well, a lot of these things are publicly available. There are boards and there are infinite number of websites. So if this is a method that you want to use, you don't have to necessarily rely on yourself to do it. There are websites out there where you can go and find the information and suppliers who supply the kit to do it. So that is sort of quite a good lead-in for one way of doing this. John, if you want to talk about JMRI, if you want to talk about JMRI and show, because Julian's shown train, the train controller software, which is hugely expensive. Would you like to show people JMRI, which is
hugely cheap?
Well, yeah, cost neutral, I think is probably a good way of describing it.
JMRI is, first of all, what does it mean? It's a Java-based model railway interface, and Java is just a programming system, and it is open source software. It is free for you and me to download, and it is capable of doing almost anything with a model railway, which is one of its difficulties. People say, well, what does it do? Well, the answer is it does this, and it does this, and it does this, and it does this. But I tend to think of it in three bits. The first bit is it's a really useful system for programming decoders and storing information from your decoders. When we buy a new Zemo decoder, a sound decoder, we fiddle with it to make the chuff sounds right. We may fiddle with the volumes to get them right. We will fiddle with the speed curve to get it right. We will save it to the decoder because we've changed the decoder. But when we come back to it 3 months later, we probably can't remember what we've done. The nice thing is that a part of JMRI is called Decoder Pro, and that just allows you to directly change CVs, parts of your decoder, and to save that information onto a screen. That's one really useful thing that JMRI does. The next really useful thing that JMRI can do is it can build you a layout in the same way that Julian showed us with Train Controller. You can just draw pictures of your layout, either as a very simple schematic or something more complicated. This is my iPad, and what it's got on it is a depiction of a very simple piece of a corner of our club narrow gauge railway. And the tracks are tracks, the points are there, and the red and green blobs in this case are sensors telling us which way the points are going. They're giving us route information, and it's pretty easy to change stuff. What it is if you know which way your fingers work when you're on a screen, acting as a mirror. So if I tap on eek, that wasn't quite what we intended to do. But if we tap on any one of these buttons, then we will change the aspect. And trust me, it does work. It's so difficult waving it around in midair. That gives us the ability to do some of the stuff that Julian was doing. In a specific problem, when we were building the new club project, we had to have a way of controlling the points and the trains from several different locations, and having the other operators know what it is you've done. And so using a computer, you use your JMRI to draw that picture that I showed you on the iPad, except the iPad is just a mimic. The real thing happens on the computer, and the computer that we chose to use is this little baby, which is a Raspberry Pi in a little box connected to a touch screen, which is there. I'll show you that better in a minute. And that is connected to our layout via, this is a computer interface that Lens produced. It is no longer the current one because the current Lens box comes with the computer interface already built in. Now that allows us to have one computer with a screen which we can see and alter. but that doesn't fix what the other guys can see. And you could do this with lots and lots of wire, but the JMRI allows you to broadcast what you are doing on a web server. So you can log into that server from somewhere else and see what the track looks like. But you can also log into that from that somewhere else and change it. So anybody can log into the wireless, which is to which our JMRI is connected. And as well as running their trains with the WeThrottle software, they can also tap on a button which says web server. Here's a phone. Down the bottom, there's a button which says web server, which is going to be that one. And then that will give me, it's actually giving me a different layout. That's one I had up on the screen earlier. And here it is on an iPad. So what we're able to do is anybody who's got a phone or an iPad, or they don't have to be Apple, obviously, can have access and can work the stuff. And it not only changes the one that they're touching, it changes everybody else's. So a touch on any of these, which you saw one change there, will change all of the others. So everybody can see on all the screens at once what's going on the layout. That's some simple stuff about JMRI. It will do lots of other stuff. It will do some of the stuff that Julian can do about running trains by using things called scripts, which will make stuff happen. It's just sort of writing programs to make things happen. I don't do that too much because I'm not interested in having the computer run my railway. I like to have the computer help me run the railway.
Yeah, I will. This is sort of like on a smaller scale. This is my system for, it's another Raspberry Pi. This is my Pi Sprog. So the board on the top is actually the DCC controller. And that does, if I spotlight myself. So what this does, sorry, I've made John spotlight again.
Okay.
Here we go, replace the spotlight. So this is a Pi Sprog. So you've got a Raspberry Pi on the bottom and you've got a Sprog on the top, and you can see that it actually connects down through these pins. It runs JMRI, and what John did say, JMRI is on an SD card. And what you can get is you can get this pre-built. There are sites that you can just download this and plug it in, switch it on, and away it goes. Obviously, you have to design your layout and everything, but this runs my small layout, which I mentioned, which is 55 inches by 18, and it runs using a touchscreen. So you plug the touchscreen into one of these two HDMI ports, which are on the side. This is the power, which is 5 volts, just standard USB-C, and then you plug the touch part of the touchscreen into there. But you can also plug a keyboard, a standard keyboard, or if you want to, a mouse into the USB ports. It picks it up straight away. What John didn't mention about the Raspberry Pi is the Raspberry Pi creates its own Wi-Fi network. So what you can do with this is you configure it like we've got house Wi-Fi. So you can configure it as a device on the house Wi-Fi, or you can make it configure its own network. And so you can either have it connected to the house system and log on to it that way, or it will create its own Wi-Fi network and you can log on to it separately if you don't want to annoy everyone else. So that is a small Raspberry Pi system. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about this evening was my DCC system, which is this, which is a DR5000. I've got to invert the picture. This is a DCC system. The only problem is the company that makes these went bust yesterday. However, the bloke who designed these is actually starting up, or he's started up his own company. And basically the only real difference between these and what he's supplying is the color of the box. They are very similar. So if you can, let's see if I can. I won't invert it, but the reason I went for this system is that this system was compatible with everything else. So you can see it's got a LAN output, it's got the B output that John was talking about, it's got LocoNet and everything, and you can just plug different manufacturers' modules into this. And this also creates a Wi-Fi, its own Wi-Fi network. Now, if I share my screen, I can show you this a bit better. Because although the company went bust, it still works. So let me share my screen. So if I, right, this is a video that I'm going to show later. Right, so what we've got on, can you see my desktop?
Yes.
Right, okay, so this is the DR5000, and this is how it's presented on the screen, and this is just a demo.
Peter, all I can see is your Garden Railway.
Yeah, we're seeing a video.
You're seeing the video?
Yeah.
Right, can you see my desk? Oh. How do you, oh, there it is. That. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Right. So this is the DR5000 demo, and you can, what you can do, it's got all the bits at the top. Like I said, LocoNet, the B bus that John spoke to about. It's got a programming track output. It's got a main output, which is this one in the middle, and it's basically compatible with everything else, or virtually everything else. What it does is this creates its own Wi-Fi network. So if I click on that, this brings up all the settings. And if my DR5000 was connected to my laptop via USB, I could configure it. And you could configure it just the same as anything else. So I could configure it so that it was part of the house network, or I can configure it separately. What I do with mine is I run it with another Raspberry Pi, but it's very useful, this particular system, because you can do things like this. So it will tell you how warm it is, how much current it's drawing. So you can get rid of that. You can drive a train from your screen if you haven't got anything attached. But like I said, I use a tablet and that connects via Wi-Fi, and I can drive with that. But you can drive using this if you want to. You can click on all the little boxes at the top. So if we click on LocoNet, you have to give it an address. Usually one is the starting off address, and you can basically change anything that you want. I haven't been brave enough to try
I do believe Peter has frozen.
I think you could be right.
I'll give him a ring.
Whilst we wait for Peter to reboot or whatever he needs to do, does anyone have any questions or any observations?
If I may come in a second, since we're still in the sort of JMRI sort of territory and the new stuff, I was very attracted by the DigiKai system, and certainly if I was a new into it, it would be where I was looking. I have a slight problem with it in the same way I do with train control systems, is that they're not Mac compatible. They will only run with Windows software. So you have to have, with both of these systems, you have to have them talking to your computer. And I don't think train control systems, Julian will correct me if I'm wrong, has got a Windows, a Mac compatible bit yet. And DigiKai is the only software it will run with is Windows, which seems to sort of eliminate quite a lot of the geeky people in the world, because I'm a sort of geeky person, and many of the geeky people I know are Mac users. Because and for the manufacturers to sort of not connect to Mac seems rather a sort of shot in the foot. I don't know how you feel about that, Julian.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the problems I think with train controller is it's been around for so long. I think it was around the mid-90s that it initially was brought out. It was before people thought about cross-product compatibility, and I don't know what system it was written in, but he's either going to have to, the developer's either going to have to bite the bullet and decide to code cross-platform, or he's going to have to do something in order to maintain the user base, because his competitors like iTrain and JMRI are cross-compatible. So yeah, especially if he's going to wanting to keep charging the very high prices that he does, is my opinion. I've just heard from Peter, by the way. He's got Wi-Fi problems, so he's trying to rejoin as fast as he can.
One of the really good things, as you point out about JMRI, is it's compatible with Windows, it's compatible with Mac, it'll run on Raspberry Pi, it'll run on Linux. And I use it on Mac and Linux and Pi. And the files are happily switched between the systems without any difficulty whatever.
When I last looked at JMRI, John, there was a lot of scripting involved. You couldn't configure it with sort of friendly controls like a train controller does. Is there still a lot of scripting involved with JMRI?
If you mean for automation?
Not necessarily, just for controlling points and signals as well.
No, for points and signals, you don't need to do scripting, because what JMR has done recently is updated the way it does routes and logic. So if you can teach yourself a little bit of basic logic, then you can get it to do routing and stuff. If you want to do any form of automation, then you do need to be in scripting, and then you have to learn how to write scripts, which of course is no different really to learning how to program Arduino, is it?
True, very true.
And there's my Arduino for Beginners book, just to show that I'm trying to catch up.
Can I ask a question about this? And it was prompted by Peter mentioning that his device failed, or at least the manufacturer's gone broke. Which one of these systems is reasonably future-proof in the sense that there will continue to be support, both hardware and software, etc.?
Well, my money will be on JMRI because it's open source. So you aren't dependent upon one developer or one company. What would you say, John?
I think that's true of software, but I think I don't know whether your question was more about hardware or was it more about software?
It was about the hardware. The software, there's probably enough there to do it, but it was hardware systems.
I think in hardware terms, the ones which look robust in the business way at the moment are Digitrax, which is going strong, and I see people with new Digitrax stuff all the time. NCE seems to be quite robust, and I see a lot being sold. And Lens still seems to be quite robust, although people get a bit sniffy about Lens and say, well, it's terribly old-fashioned, you know. But I think it's big enough and strong enough to survive. Excuse me. I would certainly be slightly nervous about any of the manufacturers' DCC systems or hardware systems which are attached to the names of model railway companies. If it's got the word Bachmann written on it, or if it's got the wrong, you know, one of those words on it, I'm not sure about its longevity. But I think we're relatively safe in hardware terms with Lens, with Digitrax, with NCE. But what do any of us know about the business world that these people occupy, I'm afraid?
Yeah. I suppose you could say if you wanted something which was going to have reasonable security in terms of hardware, then Merg is probably fairly good. Yes. Because it's a club of like-minded individuals, and they brought out everything from accessory decoders to command stations. And everything in between. They're very big on a control bus called C-bus, a CAN bus. Now CAN is used in virtually every current car on the road. That's not going to go anywhere. I suppose you could argue that the support for C-bus amongst software manufacturers could be questionable. But I don't think it was really ever designed for, you know, primarily with that in mind. It was designed to be a method of controlling points and switches and signals and other things on your railway, and it does that very well. It will also interface to DCC as well, I believe. I've been, I mean, full disclosure, I've been a member of Merg for many years, and
me.
and their kits are great. If you're a little bit unsure about soldering together an electronics kit, don't be with Merg, because they are incredibly well put together in terms of the kits. You have a sheet of paper with all the components individually taped to it alongside what they are, and then the instructions tell you how to install every single component and what it does. So if you wanted to dip your toe into electronic construction, your first circuit board, then I recommend Merg. You can't go too far wrong. And by the time, and also their kits are very well priced as well. I know people say, well, you've got to be a member, which is what, £16 or something like that. But the kits are sold for far less than you would buy the equivalent from a manufacturer ready-made, because they don't make a profit. They buy in bulk and they sell it at cost. So that's a little plug for Merg anyway.
I see a question from SW, which I guess is Stephen, is it? Probably. Which is about battery and radio control via phones, and that's something which Peter was hoping to cover this evening. It's certainly outside my knowledge. I don't know about yours, Julian.
Yeah, it is a bit. I've not experimented with it. I'm aware of other people and have experienced other people's radio control. I get the impression at the moment that there aren't those many manufacturers of radio control systems.
There was one that looked very promising, wasn't it? And then they've gone bust. I can't remember the name of it now, but it was getting some take up. Yeah. But I mean, it does make an awful lot of sense, particularly for something like a garden railway. And you'd have to think it's the future, but it seems to be worryingly far in the future at the moment to me. There's nothing mainstream.
On that particular thing, I personally use some stuff which is made by Fosworks, which is the Gauge 1 folks do that for servo control for live steam as well as for battery things. So I've got one fitted to my Class 37 Halogen, which I use, and it's great running around the garden.
Yeah. The other
And
thing,
it's got it's got a tactile controller. We certainly put it in one hand, and I don't need to look at it, and I can look at my railway as it goes around the track and still control it.
which you can't do with a mobile phone app. You can't.
Correct.
Yeah, you can't do it one-handed without looking at it.
Okay.
The other thing that Peter was going to talk about was the new Bluetooth controllers, which is starting to come onto the market. Hornby, in particular, have just launched a range of these. My understanding of the way they work is that they're small decoders which have got Bluetooth built into them, and they take their power conventionally off the track, but then you can use your phone or any other Bluetooth connected device to control the train itself. So you don't need to worry about DCC or a command station or anything like that. Everything can be controlled through either the app, which is Bluetooth connected, or through your phone directly to the locomotive. They're also saying that the sounds you can load yourself, and they're free, and you can change them as you wish. Now, I did hear from Peter the other day, who said that they've found a problem with their initial version, which is that they don't work well with PWM DC supplies. Apparently, the decoders, so Peter says, are having problems. So it might be as well to before we going down that route, if you've got a PWM DC controller, might be as well to either wait for an update from Hornby or some more experience from other users as to ways to avoid your decoders blowing up with PWM inputs to them. I believe that's what Peter was going to say.
There seems to be one needs to get a bit of a critical mass before any of this stuff really takes off, doesn't it? It took a long while for DCC to actually take off, because the protocols were beginning to exist in the late 80s when people sort of knew how it might happen. But it wasn't until Marklin and Bernd Lenz got together with the NMRA and somebody adopted these things as a formal standard, that other manufacturers were prepared to take the plunge and invest in the stuff, because there's a considerable investment if you're a manufacturer in producing these control systems to what is always going to be a limited market. Although the US is a big model railway market and Europe is a biggish model railway market, it's not the same as selling tellies to people or selling mobile phones to people. So I think it's quite difficult to get something started, isn't it?
Well, aren't Hornby basically shooting themselves in the foot by making it very much, almost trying to exclude everybody else? I don't think it's going to be compatible with.
Sorry, explain. I don't quite follow. What are Hornby doing for all of us?
Well, I'm not. I don't fully understand what they're offering, so maybe I'm just not. I haven't understood it enough. But my understanding is this: their chips will work on with their systems, but not with other people's systems.
Are we DCC or are we Bluetooth? Where are we?
This is the new Bluetooth.
Okay.
I mean, can you put a Hornby Bluetooth chip into a loco and work it through with an NCE power cut, for instance, or with a Digitrax controller?
I believe you can, if you buy their interface, that they've got some kind of method of connecting DCC to Bluetooth.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But I've not experienced that. I've not used it myself, so I can't say for certain that's the way it works. But I believe from what I've read, that's the way it's being implemented.
And then it will only work with their chips. So you almost have to have all your locos fitted with their chips if you want to use.
Well, I presume you can mix and match. I guess you could
Well,
run.
can you? I don't know. That was what I wasn't sure about. And
Well, I guess you can run DCC through your track conventionally, and some locomotives could take their power from the DCC track to their Bluetooth decoder, and then you'd have to have a separate phone or tablet, whatever, to then control those locomotives which were Bluetooth connected. So, yeah. A question about Bluetooth range. I think it was 30 meters, something like that.
enough for most people.
Enough for most people. Yeah, if you had a big garden railway, it
Eaton
might be
Lodge, right?
limited.
Struggle.
Yeah, yeah. If you had a large garden railway and you were following your train around with your phone, it'd probably be okay. I've heard from Peter. He's still got Wi-Fi problems and apologises to everyone for that. I think really at this stage we should open up the floor to any questions. If anyone's got any answers, questions, feel free to unmute and ask.
Does anyone have experience of the new Digitrax system? I think it's called Vox, or which looks to me. I mean, I was put off their old system because it looked like a sort of 1960s NASA rocket controller and very loads of buttons and no ergonomics whatsoever. The new system that looks a bit like an owl looks lovely, and I've used it very briefly and was quite impressed. But be interested in other people's experience with it.
I used it at York whilst playing with the layout behind our layout, with the big layout, which was Digitrax, and they'd upgraded to those, and they were nice to handle and nice to hold, as you say, Andy. But of course, I know no more about it than that sort of brief experience of using them on site there.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, then perhaps we should wrap up for this evening. Thanks to Andy.
Before you do, I know we've lost Peter and we've lost some stuff. Are people interested in the decoder programming end of JMRI, which I happen to have live on the screen somewhere? If anybody's interested in it, if everybody's already knows how it works and how to do it, then
No, I would be. I mean, I've tried using it and found it quite slow.
okay.
So I'll be interested to see what you can tell us.
But I mean, I'm quite happy to speak to Andy separately about that, if everybody else doesn't wish to be bored, or I can put some of that on. What do you think, guys? Since we're missing Peter.
Yeah, show it, John.
Carry on.
Why don't you put it on? If people don't want to stay put, they can duck out, can't they?
I don't want to be guilty of boring you all to death. Let me see if I can share screen. Desktops, whiteboards, Decoder Pro, share. Can you see that? Has that come up?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a Decoder Pro screen. It's what you and this demonstrates that John owns too many engines. If we pick one which is okay, what do we got? Well, there's an engine which is belonging to LMS, an ex-North London Railways tank engine, it's in. I can only go in edit only because I'm not connected to anything. If I select that one and ask it to program, if it were connected to the programming track, then I get a series of windows which I can put stuff into. So if we take something like basic, this tells me what is what address am I using, a long address or a short address, and this says I'm using the long address. The active address is that one. If I were to use its primary address, it would still be 3. allows me to set boring things like normal direction, how many speed steps. Is it digital only, or will it allow me to run it under DCC? And if I change any of those, if I were to change the direction, so I'm going to reverse that, I can press a button to write that. Although I'm only in edit mode only at the moment, so I can't actually do it because I'm not connected to stuff. And then we can move to another one where the speed control is, and so
John, sorry to interrupt. Are you looking at the programming screen? Because we're just seeing your roster at the moment.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, I see what's happened. Yep, because I'm sharing the programming. Thank you very much for pointing that out to me, Julian. Because when you screen share, you have to pick which screen it is, don't you?
Yeah.
That's what you get for doing stuff you didn't plan to do.
You might have to stop screen sharing.
I will have to stop sharing that screen. If I can stop share. Thank you. Then goes back there, and then go screen share, and then Decoder Pro editing. That's still giving you the roster screen, I guess.
No, we can see it now.
That's the right one.
Okay. In that case, you can see more. Oh, here it is. Okay, we can see this one. This is the speed one. And if you want to use a 3-point speed curve, as we used to do, that's where that's the mid speed, that's your highest speed. And then you can press right to decoder, which is down here, but not in its test mode. Or I've got the speed table here, so I can adjust any of these, or I can put a straight curve, or I could do that sort of curve, or that sort of curve. And then, but I can then save all of these, not write them to decoder and save them into the computer, so that when I come back to this again, I know what I've done to that decoder. It's useful in Zemo, where you can fiddle with sounds, what volume on particular sounds. If F3 is probably going to be a whistle, I can make that whistle louder or quieter with that. We can, or you can pick up the CVs one and just do individual CVs if you know what they are. That's not very useful. I much prefer to use it in these tabs, which show you a group of things you might like to control together. Stuff we can share, save, and then keep in a file. And then if you can just sort of file save those, and then we can, I won't save and close, I'll just close, and that will take me back to my original roster screen, which I think is that one. Yeah.
So how long did it take you to put in all of the locos on that roster screen?
Well, the answer to that question is actually rather facetiously 25 years.
Yeah.
but there is a what's newish, something like the Battle of Britain, which got built last year. I would have fiddled with it. I would have then stood it on the programming track. I would have then pressed the read all, read the whole thing, and then saved it. And that would have taken half an hour to save the whole of that decoder.
Yeah, no, that's what I was finding. And I did about 20 locos and got bored stiff. I thought, yeah, I can't be bothered with this.
I agree with you. You need to do them as you go. I bought a new decoder for something the other day and put it in and sat it on the programming track. It's not on this roster, it's on a different profile, and just sat it there and pressed the button and let it go. It takes about half an hour because there's so much in a modern decoder, whether it's ESU or Zemo, there's so much in it, it takes a long while. But you can do useful things, like you can have a photo of the loco involved down here. It's a picture of the engine we were looking at. But yes, it does. If you try and do all of your locos in one go, it will take you a long while. But if you just have one and you put it in and update it, and another one and update it, then I guess it's a little bit quicker. I'll stop sharing that now.
The other advantage of that roster, of course, is that it's given you a very handy inventory of your stock all in one place.
It does. It does. Thank you. Yes.
Just the locos, of course, not everything else. But and presumably you can export that as well, can you, John? Into
you can export that in varying formats, and you can actually export, if you're mad enough, you can export all of the CVs, but you'll just end up with huge files. But the best way to export them is you can export them as comma separated variables, or I don't think you can get a proper Excel export from it, which would be lovely to have, but I don't think it'll do it. The other useful thing I do with JMRI is where you save your files. JMRI usually saves its files inside the program itself, but in the setup for JMRI, it will allow you to put the files somewhere else. And the useful thing there is, I'll bring that back up if I may, in references. That's going to bring up, has that brought up a window you can't see?
Yeah.
Correct. We can't see it.
Okay, so my wife is much better at this than I am. Okay, so here's another window which has popped up, which is file locations. And this is, where do you want to save your files? And I use a Dropbox. And I don't know if you're familiar with Dropbox. It's just a file saving, a cloud-based thing. But if you've got a Dropbox somewhere, you can access it from any computer. And so I save these to Dropbox. So when I then go upstairs and grab it with another computer which runs the layout, everything's been updated for me. I don't have to walk around with memory sticks or disks or things like that. It's just a good way of updating stuff. See some stuff on chat. Yeah, you're quite right, John. Decoder Pro is faster than typing into a spreadsheet. Yeah, even it does it automatically. You can have a cup of tea while it's doing each loco, but it is less soul destroying than typing stuff into a spreadsheet.
Decoder Pro will also read back from a loco as well, so you can put an unknown loco on the track and it will interrogate it and tell you.
Yes,
what
it gets over the problem. If somebody's given me a loco, I don't know what its number is. If you just stick it on your programming track and ask it what it is, it'll tell you.
Won't the lens system do that without JMRI?
It will. You can put it on the programming track and ask it for an address. Yeah, that'll do that. But I find it a bit quicker if the computer's there, just to have Decoder Pro do it.
Yeah, you just press a button and off it will go.
Yeah. I guess, Julian, if nobody's got anything else for us, we should probably stop burbling.
Yes, I think so. Peter says that what he'll do, he apologizes again. He says what he'll do is he'll record a video about what he was going to talk about with Bluetooth and radio control and add it on to the video recording of this evening, and then make it available on the website for members, so we don't lose out on anything that he was going to talk about. So I think he's got an early start in the morning, so it probably won't be tomorrow, but hopefully over the weekend he'll be able to do that. So thank you everyone for coming along. A few events to tell you about. The next evening with, which is taking place on the 26th of May, is with Will Heath and Jackie Neeshaw, and they're talking about researching and building the St Neots MRC layout Bowaters paper mill. They'll give an insight into why they chose to model a corner of Kemsley Mill on the Bowaters Paper Railway, which operated in the Kent Marshes up until 1969. and they'll include how they went about researching this industrial railway and what challenges it presented to model. So that's in a month's time on the 26th of May, and you'll be able to register for that event very shortly after midnight tonight on the Guild website. Also a reminder about the Kempton Park show, which is on Saturday the 20th of May at the Grandstand Kempton Park Racecourse, new venue, but it looks very promising. Plenty of parking just inside the M25. And also in June, we've got the summer show, Saturday the 3rd of June at the Barnsley Metrodome up in Barnsley. That's the traditional summer show, but also at a new venue as well. And you can book tickets online on the Guild website, or you can phone up Archetype and do it over the phone if that's your preferred method of doing it. So lots of things happening in the near future for the Guild, and thank you all once again for coming along tonight, and hopefully we didn't bore you too much. We're able to entertain you with some information about DCC and other control systems. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.